Hey guys, it's Mr. C, Mr. Cologne from Reinforce My Faith, and I just wanted to do a quick live or impromptu live, I should say, not quick, on three questions that have been popping up. And since my background is as a biblical teacher, and I wanted to continue that, so I wanted just to provide some excerpts from my upcoming Sacred Scriptures course and just provide some general knowledge as a layman to the best of my ability to explain some of the mysteries or hard sayings of Genesis. Um, this time incorporating Nephilim, global or local flood when it comes to the flood of Noah and the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. And this was really spurred on by a lot of different sayings and a lot of different things have been going around, especially on X or Twitter. And I have the Noah or regional flood that we have here. I was brought up by David Harris, the brother of John Harris, who does that good Protestant podcast, Conversations That Matter. And he also took that and ran with it. And so I just had two YouTube links to what are a good summary of the topic of the blood itself, but then also wanted to talk about the Nephilim because they're always in vogue and the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. So I just wanted to do a live and keep it for a record and then also practice somewhat when I have some guests over. So again, Mr. C from Reinforce My Faith, and let's get started. So I usually begin the scriptures course. It's through the 73 books of the Bible, and I like to take a covenantal approach, and within that I like to tackle all 73 books. So when I talk about the TLDR of the say the book of Genesis, I give you the background and also the outline. I think the outline gives a lot, it hints a lot of what's upcoming, and I believe that it is a good way to just understand what like I said, what's upcoming in the theological outline, and give you hints and a purpose of the narrative for the most part. And we'll be dealing with Genesis 6 through 9, which is the story of the flood, and we'll briefly mention Nephilim in Genesis 6, and then Noah and the flood. And then the story of Abraham encompasses the second half of Genesis, that is 12 to 25. And as you can see here, I guess I could go back and say Genesis split into two. We have the first part of Genesis 1 through 11 and Genesis 12 to 50, and that itself is split between Abraham, Joseph, and Jacob. Abraham, Jacob, or Israel, and then Joseph. And we're going to talk about these two. So that's where we are in the narrative, so that we have a good understanding as we move forward. So the next slide here, we are talking about Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4. And this is the RSV Catholic Edition translation. The next slide will have this in written form, so don't worry about this too much, but this is where I got it from A Catholic Introduction to the Old Testament by Petrie and Bergsma. So what does Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4 say? When the people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God, angels, saw that they were fair, good looking, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. Continues on to say, the Nephilim, or giants, as a translation, gigantes, were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans and who bore children to them. These were the heroes of old, warriors of renown. And we have three possibilities of what the Nephilim are: the fallen angels, ancient kings, and sons of Seth. TLDR, the sons of Seth is the most prevalent modern translation, but the first one being fallen angels was a popular one that is backed up by the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, First Enoch, which are extra canonical books, but may have some source and truth. So, who are the sons and daughters of men? All right, so there's three interpretations that are proposed. Number one, fallen angels. This interpretation was very popular in antiquity, and it is reflected in ancient Jewish writings outside the Bible, such as Jubilees and First Enoch, as I previously mentioned. According to dispute, angels left heaven to cohabitate with human women and bore monstrous children. And we have here that despite its popularity, this theory from a theological perspective is impossible since angels are spiritual, non-corporeal beings. This means that they do not have bodies and hence cannot reproduce with human beings. From a literary perspective, a major weakness of this theory is that these angelic beings would not have been mentioned elsewhere in Genesis. Moreover, in the narrative, the flood is the result of sin of the sons of God, yet it is not angelic beings, but man who is blotted out from earth. This view turns Genesis 6 into a philosophical, incredibly literary, and inexplicable fragment in which these supposed angelic beings come out of nowhere and then immediately disappear from the narrative. I don't think that's a very strong argument there about it appearing and even the narrative, as Enoch does that, so does others that I am trying to remember, but at least Enoch, comes and goes. And Melchizedek as a mysterious king of Salem, of Jerusalem, of future Jerusalem. And it's very weird, but it is also, it comes and goes. So I think that part is kind of not as strong. And then spiritual and non-corporeal beings, I mean, these demonic entities could have taken human, become, as exorcisms believe, as Satan or devils can take over human bodies, right? So something like that could be a possibility. So I don't know if the fallen angels is dismissed too quickly, modern day post-Vatican II churches, but and then we have the ancient kings theory. This theory can be supported by biblical and ancient Near East practices of calling kings and other rulers sons of God. From this point of view, Genesis 6:2 describes the growth and royal harems. Parallels to this concept can be found in other ancient Near Eastern literature. And the popular and the one that this book is going with, and most scholars, I think Scott Hahn and other Catholic scholars, conservative scholars believe, the sons of Seth interpretation adopted here is a common view in Catholic tradition. Scripture and ancient Near Eastern literature employs son as a covenant category. In the narrative of Genesis, the sons of God are Sethites, heirs of the covenant of adopted divine sonship from Adam. The daughters of men would have been women descended from Cain, the line that has turned its back in the presence of God. The Sethite interpretation is taught by Augustine in the City of God and St. Thomas Aquinas in Summa Theologica. From this literary perspective, the Sethite interpretation is supported by the fact that the Pentateuch repeatedly depicts intermarriage between men and the covenant line of women from other peoples who do not worship the Lord as something to be avoided. It also makes more sense in the flood that follows. As a result of intermarriage, the covenant people become so corrupted that all the world is violent like Cain's descendants, with the sole exception of Noah and his family, and the righteous remnant of the line of Seth. So that is why the flood happens. And before we go talk about the flood and the sons of Seth and this interpretation, I just wanted to touch upon these 4 New Testament passages, 2 of them found in St. Jude and then 1st and 2nd Peter, that hint at these extra biblical sources. Again, all truth is God's truth. Does that mean those sources are inspired? But at least they contain a hint of truth in them. They come from the same source. So they go as follows. Jude, chapter 1. I believe there's only one chapter in Jude to begin with, but anyways, I guess I should have flipped June 6 and then June verses 14 and 15. But anyways, 14 and 15 says, "It was of these also that Enoch in the 7th generation from Adam prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord came to this holy myriads to execute judgment on all and convict all the ungodly of all their deeds of ungodliness which they have committed in such an ungodly way, and that all harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him," which mirrors something found in Enoch 1:9, and then Jude 1:6. "And the angels that did not keep their own position but left their proper dwelling have been kept by him in eternal chains and nether gloom until the judgment of the great day." And then from 1 Peter chapter 3, "In which Christ went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly did not obey when God's patient waited in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were saved through water. Preach to the spirits in prison. This is talking about the harrowing of hell, or where Christ died and preached to those souls there, as we say in one of the creeds. And then 2 Peter 2, for if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to the pits of the nether gloom to be kept until judgment. So we have here the book of Enoch. This is I was going to say greatest hits, but themes in the book of Enoch. Again, extra biblical apocryphal book, but just to talk about that a little bit here. And we have that Enoch angelic revelation. Enoch, the protagonist, is taken on heavenly journeys and receives revelations from angels, including the archangel Uriel. These revelations encompass cosmology and geology and divine mysteries. The book emphasizes the interaction between celestial and earthly realms, the fallen angels and the Nephilim. A central narrative involves fallen angels, here referred to as the Watchers, who descend to the earth, interact with humans, women, and produce a race of giants called the Nephilim. The theme is significant in understanding the consequence of divine transgressions. The book also contains apocalyptic elements describing the end of the world and final judgments of both the wicked and the righteous. It introduces the concept of the Son of Man, a messianic figure who will play a pivotal role in the divine plan. The moral and ethical teachings. The book offers moral and ethical teachings to its readers. Enoch exhorts his descendants to live righteous lives, follow God's commandments, and avoid wickedness. And that there's some authority in Enoch's writings there. And I keep mentioning Enoch. Who's Enoch? Enoch is the great-grandson of Adam, great-great-great-grandson of Adam, who literally walked with God and was taken up to heaven. He's taken up to heaven. Him, Elijah, and Melchizedek is not said what happened to him, but at least explicitly him and Elijah are two people in scriptures, and then through Catholic tradition, the Blessed Virgin Mary were taken up to heaven, assumed into heaven. And we're going to leave Enoch soon enough and talk about the flood, but apocryphal book of Enoch, and we have here the ancient Jewish religious texts considered canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So I did have a little bit of fun talking about them previously, and how they have a wider book of scripture in terms of their canon, as the Protestant Bible has 66, the Catholic Bible has 73, and then they have more than that, like the Orthodox, who have some more books, and these Ethiopian Orthodox have the most out of the quote-unquote Trinitarian or high church or ancient church traditions that at least go back several or a couple hundred years. So I don't know if they're high church or not. I know obviously Orthodox are, but I'm not sure about the Tawido church in Ethiopia. But they are a smaller sect. General outline: the book of the Watchers, Genesis 1 to 36, and then parables, and then astronomical book, and then the dreams and visions, and then the epistle of Enoch are how it's broken down in terms of the book of Enoch. Again, I like having a TLDR on what the book is, different books of the Bible, but this is being a apocryphal book. I take the same approach, and I also have the outline, which gives you a kind of an overview of what's upcoming. So speaking of another little overview, so we have here Genesis 5 through 9, and then Noah narrative, and then I stopped and talk about a little bit about Genesis 7. Noah and his family were selected to enter the ark as the flood waters comes. And actually, I'm going to go forward because I did want to show you the outline here about Noah and his ancestry, the wickedness of humanity, God's plan to destroy the earth, and then God's covenant with Noah. At least the beginnings of that, right? The sign will be the rainbow. But then let me go here. What God says on Genesis 6, verses 5 through 7. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of the heart was only evil continually. And then the Lord was sorry that he ever made humans on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out them whom I have created from the face of the land, for I am sorry that I have made them. And then it goes on to say that, but Noah found favor with the Lord. And then it talks about the descendants of Noah. And Genesis 7, here's the important narrative where it talks about flood, whether it's global or local. The flood continued for 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above water. The waters prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. and the waters prevailed so mightily upon the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heavens were covered, and the waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all the flesh died that moved upon the earth, birds, cattle, beasts, and swarming creatures that swarm upon the earth, and every man, everything on dry land, in those nostrils was the breath of life, died. He blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the ground, men and animals, creeping things, and birds of the air. They were blotted out from heaven. Only Noah was left, and those that were with him in the ark. Like it kind of explicit there about every living thing there. If you take that the simpler, there's the literal interpretation, but there's also called the at face value, the normative interpretation. When you just read a passage, what is the first, what it says read to you, and it's the plain sense. I guess I'm trying to say of that. That is what it reads to you. It just talks about Genesis 6-10 about about Noah, because of the wickedness and violence of the human race, God sent a flood, saving only one righteous man and his family, all the representatives of every beast and bird. There's some flood stories found all over ancient world, and there are psychological evidence that these events kind occurred. And there's something that we'll probably bring up in the course, just a little diversion. If we're going to do a diversion on Enoch, on the Nephilim, we can also do a diversion on the flood narratives, and maybe even the scientific recent archaeological evidence of a great reset or great resets that happened. God created a new covenant with a man through Noah and never get to destroy the world by flood. The sign of this, a rainbow, and the flood is a type of baptism, which now saves you. Which now saves you. First Peter. All right, so here's his interpretation. It has either a global flood, a local flood, or even it has here a mythical flood. Is it okay? So yes, so this is the last slide when it talks about the flood, and I wanted to mention it. So if it's a global flood, this stems from the passage that states that God destroyed all flesh in which the breath of life from under heaven, and that all high mountains were covered with water, so that all flesh died that moved upon the earth, except Noah and those with him. Moreover, after the flood, the point of the table of nations to show that the peoples of the world are descendants from the sons of Noah, Shem, and then the other two brothers, which are Japheth and Ham, I believe. The three brothers of Noah, where we get who are said to be traditionally the races, and they said that these races are to be the Black, Caucasian, and Asiatic races. Controversial, but that's, I guess, traditional interpretation of that. This interpretation is taken by the New Testament, which repeatedly interprets the flood at the time of Noah as a cosmic destruction. It exists is because of this text that the Jewish and Christian tradition from ancient times treated the flood as a global catastrophe. And it gives an example of St. Augustine's City of God. A local flood, this view is more difficult to accommodate with the wording of Genesis narrative. So even there we have a problem, right? Going against what the plain sense or even literal interpretation of scripture is. But it allows the flood to be identified with a number of water events that appear to have struck near east in ancient times. It has been in favor of the fact that all peoples of the ancient Near East remember a singular flood that almost wiped out mankind. So all these floods, I guess there was not one great big flood, but different catastrophic events, and this is a retelling of that. So some scholars see this as evidence that a very real traumatic flood did strike the region at an early stage of human history, and that this is what the narrative in the first 11 chapters of Genesis is trying to uphold, that mythopoetic understanding. And then we have the mythical flood. This view holds that there is no historical event whatsoever behind the flood narrative, but the Genesis simply is one among many ancient Near Eastern myths of origin, such as those found in the Epic of Gilgamesh or Enuma Elish. It has to disfavor the striking literary parallels between the flood account in Genesis and other ancient texts. In more recent magisterial documents, the Catechism of the Church treats the Noah and the flood as a real part of salvation history, and it teaches that God made the covenant with Noah after the flood and that the covenant with Noah remains in force. However, it leads to precise interpretation of the event open, kind of cooking, I guess, to use that, but maybe not. It just leaves it open-ended in terms of what interpretation you choose to use. So now we have the final talking about what the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is. And here we're moving into the second half of Genesis. We're here breaking down Genesis 11 to 35. And in this part here, that talks about Genesis 14 and 18, where Abram, who later becomes Abraham, deals with Lot and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot's wife. So we're going to talk about this here in this slide. And this is Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities of the plain of the Jordan, play an important role in the life of Abraham. And the StreamYard's logo is there, so I have to read over it. In the history of Israel, the Bible describes the men of these cities as wicked, great sinners. In contemporary scholarship, of course, this question has been raised. What exactly is the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? Is it homosexual relations, or some scholars have suggested a sin of inhospitality towards strangers, some kind of sin such as social injustice? So, what does this book, which is Catholic Introduction to the Bible by Branch Petrie and then John Bergsma, after telling us that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is very grave, Genesis 18:20. Genesis then goes on to describe a situation that is clearly focused on sodomitical or homosexual relationships. After discovering that Lot has 2 male visitors, the men in the city of Sodom demand to bring them out to us that we may know them. In this case, the word "know" yada is a Hebrew euphemism for sexual relations. This is made explicitly immediate after when Lot insists he protected 2 male visitors and despicably offers the men of Sodom instead the 2 daughters who are not yet known, have not known yada man, which were virgins, have not known of a man's touch, I guess. Another more less literal but more understandable translation by me. In recent times, based on later references to Sodom and Gomorrah in prophetic literature, some argue that sin of Sodom has nothing to do with homosexual relations, but rather it's focused on inhospitality or some other form of injustice. And indeed, the prophets associate Sodom and Gomorrah with lack of social justice. Isaiah 1 and 9 and then 3:9, disregard the poor, Ezekiel 16, and widespread immorality, Jeremiah. However, a close reading of these texts in the prophets reveal that these are prophetic applications of the proverbial depravity of Sodom to the contemporary city of Jerusalem. They are not redefinitions of the sin of Sodom as presented in Genesis. Indeed, New Testament itself explicitly identifies the sin of Sodom as a sexual in nature and when it refers to licentiousness of the citizens. In response to this debate, the magisterium of the Catholic Church has clarified that the accounts of Sodom does in fact refer to homosexual relations and continues to teach on the basis of Genesis 19 that, and other texts of sacred scripture, that while homosexual persons must be accepted with respect, compassion, sensitivity, sodomitical acts or homosexual acts are acts of grave depravity and intrinsically disordered. So, in closing, it is worth noting that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah have at times been considered mythical, the invention of the biblical author. However, recent archaeological excavations have made a strong case for identifying Sodom and Gomorrah with the Tel El Haman, a site which is now in the state of Jordan, near the entrance of the river Jordan to the Dead Sea. The identification is correct. If the identification is correct, archaeological records show that Sodom and Gomorrah were extremely powerful and wealthy cities in the early 2nd millennium BCE, but were just suddenly destroyed by natural disaster by mid-millennium and remained uninhabited for 700 years. So if you were taking my class, or if I was teaching the course, God destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah due to, number one, and primarily homosexual acts and inhospitality, not being hospitable, or social injustice, extreme disregard for their neighbor, unwelcoming to the innocent stranger. So I take both approaches, but keeping in mind that the primary aspect was homosexual acts. Because the Bible does say both, but people try to play around with that by making two into one and then eliminating inhospitality. Almost like the purpose of sexual relations as procreative, number one, and number two as the good of the spouses. They try to flip that as making number one the good of the spouses, number two to procreate, and then eliminate procreation as well and just keep it for the good of the spouses. So they try to do this with this passage, but primarily is homosexual acts, but also inhospitality. Before I end, I wanted to talk about one of the passages in the New Testament, right? In other places, no, it's all the New Testament that talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. Before we talk about catechism, a traditional catechism, and the forces that cry out for heaven for vengeance. So, references Matthew 10. Christ says, "And whoever shall not receive you or hear your words when ye depart from the house, city of the, shake off the dust from your feet. Truly I say to you, I shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than that city." Matthew 11, 20, 24. Christ warns of the fate of some cities where he did some of his works. Again, and you, Capernaum, you will be exalted above heaven. No, you will be brought down to Hades, hell, Gehenna. For if the deeds of power done in you have been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that on the day of judgment, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom than for you. Wow. Luke 17, Christ says, "Likewise, it is also in the days of Lot. They did not eat, drank, they bought. They did eat, they drank, they bought and sold, they planted and they builded. But the same day the Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. And thus it will be with the days when the Son of Man is revealed." And then we talked about the judgment day. 2 Peter 2 says that God says that just as God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and saved Lot, he will deliver godly people from the temptations and punish the wicked in judgment day. Romans 9, and Isaiah predicted that if the Lord of hosts had not left survivors to us, we would have fared like Sodom and Gomorrah, like Sodom had been made like Gomorrah. Records that both Sodom and Gomorrah indulged sexual immorality, pursued unnatural lusts, and served as an example by undergoing punishment of eternal fires. This is Jude 1:7. Jude has a lot of good nuggets today, right? It talks about Sodom and Gomorrah being punished. It also talks about Enoch and the harrowing of hell. And then we have Revelation 11. And it says, "When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that is prophetically called Sodom and Egypt, which the Lord was crucified." This will be our last slide. Before we talked about, thank you for bearing with me and going over just a little bit of a Nephilim, global and local flood. Same with Sodom and Gomorrah from this humble layman who studies scripture and would like to be a facilitator, continue to be a facilitator for you, talking about reinforce my faith in the sacred scriptures. Look at my page so you can log in and just connect and talk about this further. So, in the traditional Catholicism, the sin of Sodom is one of 4 mortal sins that cry out for heaven for vengeance. They're very serious. The other ones are murder of the blood of Abel, direct and intentional oppression of the poor, and then defrauding workers of their just wages. So, when I social justice or Catholic social teaching, I always talk about the last 2, right? The direct oppression of the poor, and then defrauding workers of just wages, and then I just add there at the end the sin of Sodom. So sodomy is very detrimental, so very disgusting to the Lord, and has been for the church through all this time. So does that mean we can not, love the homosexual sodomitical person, but hate the sin? So, all right, thank you guys for joining me for this live. And I wanted to thank all those who have been helping me and just giving me props and just sticking with me. And I appreciate all your help and support. And may God bless you. Take care and seek the true, the good, and the beautiful.